Raider Church, how are we doing tonight? Great to see everybody. My name's Clayton Walker. I'm one of the pastors here at Raider Church. If we haven't met, and we are pumped that you're here. And I always like to start off just letting you know, especially if it's your first time here, like whether you are a Jesus follower or not, whether you're into this whole church thing or not, this Jesus thing or not, we are pumped that you're here. And regardless of the way that you feel about us, we are pumped that you're here and believe God has something special for you tonight. And I just want to start off asking, like, how many, and I know this is kind of an easy question to start off with, but how many Texas Tech what is that? Happy birthday. Thanks. It is my birthday. Thanks for that. Special, yeah. Look what you started, whoever said that. Happy birthday, dear Clayton. Happy birthday to you. Thank you. For those of you who know me, I'm 26 years old today, and forever in my mind at least. No, I'm 34 today. It is my birthday, and but man, I can't think of a better way transition back into church mode. Can't think of a better way to spend my birthday than here with you guys tonight, right? Okay, so back to my question though. All right, so easy question. How many of you are Texas Tech Red Raider fans? Like Wreck-'em Tech, guns up. Okay, how many of you are Dallas Cowboy fans? Let's see your hands. We them boys, right? All right. How many of you are Rangers fans? Let's see a show of hands, okay? What about how many of you are Yankees fans? I'm a Yankees fan, all right? Hey, I love Red Raiders. I love the Cowboys. I love the Rangers. I also love the Yankees. And I know you're probably thinking, like, how could you like the Rangers and be from Texas and like the Yankees? Well, cool story. My mom and her brothers grew up with the Mantle family. And so my mom and my uncle spent a lot of times, if you don't know who the Mantle family is, that's Mickey Mantle, one of the most famous Yankees, one of the best baseball players to ever play the game. My mom and brothers grew up with his kids. And so they went to and spent a lot of time at Mickey Mantle's house, like swimming in his pool, and grew up going to his house. And so my uncles knew all of his boys and knew Mickey Mantle. And so a lot of us have, in my family, we have baseballs signed by Mickey Mantle. I've got one. It's in a safe at my house. And every time we're struggling financially, my wife is like, why don't you sell the Mickey Mantle baseball? To which I'm like, no way. Like, there's no chance I'm selling that baseball. Like, I love that baseball. And so because of my family's connection, I've met a lot of his kids. I didn't get to meet him before I died, but that's really where our families, like my family's passion for the Yankees came from, was our connection with the Mantle family. And so I have this baseball. I've loved the Yankees ever since. I've always been a huge fan of the New York Yankees. Now, there's another team I'm a fan of that you're probably, again, you're going to be disappointed me in. I love the Los Angeles Lakers. I love the Lakers. I've been a fan of Kobe Bryant, actually, since he got out of high school. Now, I know some of you are like, how are you a pastor and you like Kobe Bryant? Listen, I don't know. I can't explain these things, okay? But he was coming out of high school, went straight to the NBA, and I just thought this guy was the next Michael Jordan, and he is the second greatest basketball player to ever play the game after Michael Jordan. That's just my opinion, okay? It's fact, but it's also my opinion. And so I like Kobe Bryant. I'm a fan of Kobe Bryant. I'm a fan of the Los Angeles Lakers. But no matter what sports team you're a fan of, okay, we love those teams. We root for those teams, okay? We root for Texas Tech. But I'm willing to bet, like, a lot of you wouldn't want to go out and like play offensive line for Texas Tech. Like, I'm just betting, like when if you were the one that was going out and being on the line this weekend, I'm willing to bet you might think twice about that decision, right? Because it's great, like, to be a fan on the sidelines and to root everybody on, and then when they don't do so hot, when they don't do so well, to get down on them, and talk bad about the players. But if it was you out there, it might be a different story. You might think twice before actually stepping out onto the field because of what it could cost you. Well, the same thing is true in following Jesus. Jesus had a lot of fans. Like people that were saying, go Jesus, you're the best, like you're awesome. And he would have thousands of people that were following him, and he would feed them, and he would do cool things for them, and he would heal the sick, and he raised a dead man back to life one time. And so all these crowds of people were coming, and they wanted something from Jesus. And Jesus would have these mass crowds following him. They were fans of Jesus. And here's what a fan is. It's an enthusiastic admirer. That's what a fan is. That's a definition. Like if you were to look up what a fan is, it's an enthusiastic admirer. Jesus had a lot of enthusiastic admirers. Like they loved him for the things that he did for them. And so Jesus would often say, come and see. And he would feed people. That was kind of the message to the masses, to the crowds. Like, come and see, come and see, come and taste and see what I'm all about. And so he would give these messages to thousands of people, and he would feed them, and again, and he would heal and restore the sight back to the blind. And he would do these amazing things, and then crowds were cheering, yes, yes, go Jesus, you're the best. Like, we love you, Jesus. Until that message turned from coming and seeing to coming and dying. You see, Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, he would tell these mass crowds, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to pick up your cross and follow me. You're going to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. If you're going to follow me, I'm going to turn you into a fisher of men. If you're going to follow me, like, you've got to be willing to give up everything in this life in order to follow me. There was a rich man that came and wanted to follow Jesus one time. And yes, Jesus, go Jesus. I love you, Jesus. I want to follow you, Jesus. And Jesus told him, hey, if you want to follow me, he said, go and sell everything you've got. And then come back and follow me. See, he knew what that man's idol was. He knew what was number one in that man's heart. And it couldn't remain number one in his heart if he was going to follow Jesus. You see, there's a difference between a fan and a follower. There's a big difference. There's a big difference today. There's a lot of us that are here and we sing the cool songs, man, and Mark and the band, they just did an incredible job. Like, I love those songs, and the words of those songs, man, they get us into it so well. And we're shouting those words and we're singing those words. Maybe some of us are doing the church thing and lifting your hands, I mean, we love those songs. Like, we get up, we come here. Maybe you come here week after week, and we are great fans of Jesus. And listen, that's great. We all start out as fans of Jesus. It's a great first step to take. But when times get tough and the message gets a little bit harder, are you going to move from being a fan to a follower? And see, that's what we're going to talk about in this series. In John chapter 6, there's thousands of people that are fans of Jesus, crowds that are following Jesus, and Jesus starts to change from come and see to come and die. Like, the message starts to get harder. And it says many of the disciples, many of the people who were following Jesus turned around and left him. You see, they weren't willing to move from being a fan to being a follower, but there were 12 that did. At least 12, there was many more. But specifically, there was a group of 12 guys who left everything to follow Jesus. They completely reoriented their lives around following Jesus. They left their jobs, their families, their land, their homes. I mean, they left everything to follow Jesus. They moved from being a fan to being a follower. The Greek word for a disciple, a follower of Jesus, was mathetes, which literally meant a disciplined follower or learner of the way of Jesus. They were disciplined followers that left everything and completely reoriented their lives around following Jesus. You see, the 12 did this. They moved from fans to followers. And so in this series, we're going to look at each one of those followers of Jesus. They started out as a fan, but as Jesus began to call them for more, like to a commitment to follow them with all of their lives, they made the decision, unlike a lot of people in the crowd, they made the decision to get serious about their relationship with Jesus and become a follower. And that's what I'm going to challenge you to do in this series. Each week that we come back to this series, we're going to do it for a couple weeks. This semester we'll come back to it. But when we get to this series, I'm going to challenge you to move from being a fan to being a follower. And the way that I'm going to do that is we're going to look at the life of a disciple. And tonight we're going to look at Thomas. So if you got a Bible, you can turn to John chapter 20. John chapter 20, if you're following along in YouVersion or on our notes at raiderchurch.com, again, the verses will be there. I'll have the verses for you on the screen. And as always, I like to remind you guys, we've got free Bibles for you. Like if you don't have a Bible or if you don't have a Bible in the translation you understand very well, we've got free Bibles for you in the lobby. It's on us. You can take one after the service. But if you got a Bible, John chapter 20, let's go. And we'll look here at the life of Thomas and see how he began to follow Jesus. So one of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. Jesus has died on the cross, he's risen, and he's appeared to a lot of the disciples, but Thomas hasn't seen him yet. The others are telling Thomas that, hey, Jesus is alive. But you're going to see Thomas doesn't believe it. And so they told him, we've seen the Lord. But he replied, I won't believe it. Some of you are here, right here, like even tonight. Like you hear Christians talking about this Jesus guy who's risen from the dead, and you're like, man, I'm not sure I can buy that. Like he literally, like historically, physically, like rose from the dead. Like that's a real thing that happened. Like I'm not too sure about that. Some of you are in the exact same spot. And here's what I want you to know. That's totally okay. Like I'm pumped that you're here. It's totally okay if this is the spot that you're in. Like, man, I'm not too sure about this whole Jesus thing. I'm not too sure he rose from the dead. Listen, Thomas, one of the disciples, one of the guys who left everything to follow Jesus for 3 years when Jesus was on this earth, was in the same boat. Others were telling him, other followers of Jesus were trying to tell him, hey, we've seen the Lord. He's risen. And Thomas is like, man, I'm not sure I can buy that. So Thomas says, I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side. 8 days later, the disciples are all together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. So they're all together. And the reason they're all together, and it says the door was locked, because the disciples were scared that they were next. Jesus had been crucified on the cross, and they're all together. They're all huddled up together. They're scared. They're scared that the Jews, the Pharisees, are going to come and get them next and turn them over to the Romans to be crucified, just like Jesus was, because they were his followers. And so they're scared. They're huddled up together in this room. They've got the door locked so that no one can come in because they're scared. Well, Jesus, sneaky Jesus, appears right in the home there with them. Look what he says. Peace be with you, he said. And then he says to Thomas, Thomas hadn't said anything. Thomas is just kind of chilling there. But Jesus knows his heart. Jesus knows that Thomas is struggling. And so he says to Thomas, put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. Check out Thomas's response. My Lord and my God, Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, you believe because you have seen me. Thomas believed that Jesus had risen from the dead because he saw him standing right there, and he got to touch his hands where the nails went through his hands. And he got to touch the hole in his side where the spear went through Jesus' body to confirm that he was dead. And so Jesus says, Thomas, you believe because you've seen me. But then check out what Jesus says to us. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. Thomas, you believe because you've seen, but Jesus says, literally thinking of us, like thinking of you and me, how crazy is that? Like in this day and this time, Jesus says, but blessed are those who believe without seeing. Now, you might be here, and I went through a time like this at one point too. Like, how could I believe that Jesus had risen from the dead if I don't get to see him? Like, Thomas, that's great for you. Like, you got to see Jesus risen from the dead, but I don't. And Jesus, you're saying, blessed are those who believe but not see. I mean, how could you possibly, Jesus, how could you expect me to believe that you rose from the dead if I don't get to see you? If I don't get to physically see you and touch your hands where the nails went in and see the hole in your side and see you resurrected from the dead, like how could I possibly believe? Well, Jesus gives us some really strong reasons to believe. We're going to talk about one of them tonight, but there's a lot more reasons to believe that Jesus physically, historically rose from the dead. There's a lot of evidence. We're just going to look at it a little bit tonight. Some of the evidence for why we believe Jesus rose from the dead. And we can get some of that evidence through the story of Thomas tonight. You see, Thomas didn't believe. He left everything to follow Jesus. I'm sure you can imagine, like he left everything. He left his job. He left everything behind to go and to follow Jesus while Jesus lived and did his ministry here on earth for 3 years. And even though Jesus told them like over and over and over again, guys, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to die, and then 3 days later, I'm going to be risen again. Like he told the disciples that several times. He told them what was going to happen. Yet for some reason, when they actually arrest Jesus and kill him, it's like in the middle of the storm, they forgot everything that Jesus said. Doesn't that sound familiar? How oftentimes have you been there? Like you've heard what Jesus has said, you've read the Bible, maybe you've heard a message, you know the words to a song maybe that have brought you comfort and joy and peace before. You know the truth, but in the midst of the storm, it's like that all goes out the window. Well, that's what happens for the disciples. That's what happens for Thomas. Even though Jesus had said, guys, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to die, and then 3 days later, I'm going to rise again. Thomas had completely forgotten that. And so even when the other disciples are saying, hey, it's true, you remember, he told us he was going to be arrested, he told us he's going to die, he told us he's going to be risen again. Thomas was like, I can't believe it. I don't believe it. You see, in the middle of the storm, it's really easy to forget what Jesus has told us. Thomas did. And I'm sure you can imagine, like put yourself in his shoes. Like he had left everything to follow this guy. Now he's dead. His hopes have been shattered. They were supposed to follow Jesus. Like Jesus is supposed to be the Son of God and now he's dead. Like how is that possible? How does the Son of God die? So Thomas's hopes were completely shattered. And so when the other disciples and the women who saw Jesus are coming and saying, Thomas, he's alive, we've seen him. He's like, I don't believe it. I can't believe it. He didn't want to get his hopes up. He couldn't believe it. He didn't want to go through that disappointment all over again. And so he couldn't believe it. Well, Jesus comes and appears in front of Thomas, knowing what Thomas is struggling with, knowing the doubt in Thomas's heart. And you would think in that moment, right, that when Jesus appears and he gets there with Thomas and he knows what Thomas has been thinking, he knows that he hasn't believed his friends who are telling him that Jesus has been risen from the dead. You would think that when he gets with Thomas, he'd be like, Thomas, I'm alive, dude. Why didn't you believe your friends? Why didn't you believe them when they told you they had seen me? You would think Jesus would come down on Thomas like, Thomas, why didn't you believe? Like, why can't you get this together? I told you this. How could you forget, Thomas? How could you forget that I told you that I was going to die? How could you forget that I told you I was going to die and be risen again? Like you would think that's what Jesus would do. That's the way a lot of us feel sometimes. Like in our doubt and our struggle, we think Jesus is just going to come down on us like he's disappointed in us. That's not what happens at all. Jesus comes and meets Thomas right where he's at, right at his doubt, right at the source. And instead of coming down on Jesus or on Thomas, he offers his hand. And these aren't just any hands. These are Jesus' nail-scarred hands. And he offers them to Thomas. He says, Thomas, look, touch for yourself. See that I've been risen from the dead. Now, if I was Jesus in that moment, okay, and it's a good thing I'm not, but if I was Jesus like in that moment, and I'm reaching my hands out to Thomas, and they've got like these wounds in them that Thomas can see. when Thomas started to touch them, I'd be like, oh, Thomas, that hurts. Like, why would you do that? You know, that's kind of like what the dad would do, right? You know, you're playing with your kid, you know, making them think that you're hurt when you're not. But you know, I'm just kidding. Like, that's not what I would do. But you can imagine, like, seeing the wound in his side and thinking, like, are you really alive? Like, are you just kind of barely alive, right? Because you just look like you like died, like this bloody, horrible death on the cross, and now you're standing here. And the point that I'm trying to make to you is this. It's that Jesus, when he appears to Thomas, he's not barely alive. He's completely alive. He's not struggling to stay alive. No, quite the opposite. He is very strong. And the Bible gives us the idea that Jesus has this kind of new body, and that even though Thomas can still see the wounds in his hands and the wound in his side, like Jesus has this, what the Bible calls a resurrected body. Like he's got this new body that is strong and healthy. He's not barely alive, like he crawled in the door from the cross, like he was left for dead. You see, that wouldn't have convinced Thomas. But notice Thomas's response, right? When he sees Jesus, he touches his hands, he touches his side. How does Thomas respond? He says, "My Lord and my God." In other words, what Thomas is saying is that you are God. Because only God could do what you did. Only God could come back from the dead like you've done. And so Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." He believes. Jesus convinces him. Thomas didn't believe, but he sees Jesus and now he believes. And so Jesus says, "You've believed because you've seen me." You see, before Thomas didn't believe like the other disciples. He didn't believe that Jesus was alive, but now he believes because he's seen Jesus, and now he's going out and telling other people about Jesus, just like the disciples are doing with him. He's going out and telling everybody, "Hey, I've seen Jesus risen from the dead. I've touched his hands. I've touched his side. It's him. He's alive." He tells everyone. In fact, we know from outside sources from the Bible, Greek and Roman historians have told us what happened to Thomas after that moment. That Thomas began to go from people group to people group to people group, telling them about Jesus, preaching that Jesus had risen from the dead and that he had seen him. Not that someone had told him. You need to remember that. Thomas wasn't going around saying, "Hey, Peter told me that he saw Jesus risen from the dead, and so I'm going to tell you what Peter told me." That's not what's happening here. Thomas is going around saying, "I saw him with my own eyes. I touched his hand, I touched his side. Jesus is alive. He was dead, but now he's alive. He conquered the grave." And so since Jesus is the only one to ever conquer the grave, Thomas is saying, you need to follow this guy if you want to conquer the grave. And so he goes from people group to people group, telling people about Jesus until he makes it into India. And in India, he's leading a lot of people to Jesus. Until he meets this one group that doesn't like what Thomas has to say, and Thomas is speared to death. You see, Thomas believed that Jesus had risen from the dead, so much so, he was so convinced that he was willing to die for what he said he saw. Liars make bad martyrs. You see, Thomas was in a position to know whether or not Jesus had really risen from the dead, because he was saying that he saw him with his own two eyes, that he touched him. You see, Thomas wasn't in a place of having to guess whether or not it was true, kind of like you and I, or having to wonder or having to consider the evidence. Thomas knew whether or not it was true. And no one dies for what they know to be a lie. A lot of people will die for something they believe to be true. Maybe something they were told. If you and I were to die, go out to some random tribe or people group and die trying to tell people about Jesus, we would die for something we believe to be true. But we're not dying for something we would know to be true or false. Thomas did. Thomas died saying he was an eyewitness, that I saw him. No one dies for something they know to be a lie. And Thomas was in a position to know. And so here's what I want you to see tonight. It's that we can believe without seeing because Thomas believed after seeing. We can believe without seeing, like Jesus said, blessed are those who believe without seeing. We can believe without seeing because Thomas believed after seeing, and he gave his life for it. He died saying, I saw Jesus, and he died in a gruesome, horrible, painful way. Nobody dies for what they believe to be a lie. And here's the thing, it wasn't just Thomas. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 15 that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at one time. Acts chapter 1 says that Jesus walked with and talked with the disciples and ate with them over a period of 40 days. Jesus appeared to an enemy of the church, Paul, who was a persecutor and killed Christians. He appeared to him, and Paul was changed and became a follower of Jesus. He appeared to his brother, James. I mean, what would you have to do to convince your brother that you're the Son of God? I mean, none of us would believe that, okay? I've got 3 brothers. If I went home and told them I was the Son of God, they would laugh in my face. They would never believe it. Unless I died and came back to life. Jesus' brother James was not a follower of Jesus until he saw Jesus risen from the dead. So we've got an enemy, we've got a skeptic, we've got a doubter in Thomas. 1 Corinthians 15 tells us that more than 500 people saw Jesus alive at one time. And many of these people, even confirmed from outside sources from the Bible, died saying they saw him, like they were in a position to know. Liars make bad martyrs. They knew it. They believed it, and they were willing to die for it. We can believe without seeing because Thomas and many others believed after seeing, and they were willing to die for it. Now, here's one of the things that amazes me about this story is that when Jesus comes and appears in front of Thomas, Thomas is doubting that Jesus is alive. Jesus appears to him. And he offers him his hand, like he meets Thomas where he's at. In the midst of his doubt, in the midst of his struggle, in the midst of his fear, Jesus comes and offers him his nail-scarred hands. For a couple of reasons. One, I think to help him through his doubt and his fear. And 2, to remind Thomas of how much he loved him, that he was willing to die for him. And so let me ask you tonight, what are you struggling with? What are you doubting? What are you having trouble believing? What storm are you in that's maybe caused you to forget what Jesus has told you in his word? Is it a job? Are you worried about a job after you graduate? Are you doubtful that Jesus can provide, that he can come through? Maybe you're struggling financially right now. Maybe you're not too sure that Jesus can handle like the real practical things in your life. Maybe some of you are worried or anxious about getting married one day. Graduate from college, and that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to get married. Maybe some of you have that person that you're pretty sure is you're going to end up with. Maybe some of you don't. That can cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry, a lot of doubt. Like, can I trust Jesus with this part of my life? Whatever it is that you're struggling with right now, whatever storm that you're in right now, can I just remind you and tell you tonight that Jesus wants to offer you his nail-scarred hand. He's not here saying, why are you doubting? Why do you fear? Why are you struggling? Like, I don't understand it. Like, why are you doing this? No, Jesus understands. The Bible says that Jesus has been through everything that we went through in his time here on earth. He struggled just like we do. The Bible says, yet he was without sin, and so he's able to help us. You see, Jesus is for you. He's not against you. And so whatever it is that you're struggling with tonight, Jesus wants to offer you his hand. His nail-scarred hand. Because he wants to help you through it. And he wants to remind you tonight that in the middle of your doubt, in the middle of your fear, your struggle, your anxiety, he wants to remind you tonight that he loves you. He cares about you. He wants what's best for you. And he cares about the details of your life. And whatever it is that you're going through right now, Jesus will meet you right where you're at. He's not saying, hey, you got to figure this thing out. You got to get your life together. Stop worrying, stop doubting. And then maybe you can come follow me. That's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus, just like he did to Thomas, is offering you his hand and saying, come, I'll help you with your doubt. I'll help you with your fear. I'll help you with your struggle. I'll help you with your anxiety. Because I love you. See the wounds in my hand. See that I love you. I was willing to die for you. So whatever it is that you're going through tonight, I want to challenge you to believe. Like, even though you can't physically see Jesus here with you maybe right now, even though you can't physically see the end or the answer to your doubt, to your worry, Jesus is saying, trust me. Believe in me. Here's my hand. I'll help you through it. I love you. See, here's what Jesus was telling Thomas, is that by believing, you receive a blessing. Believing brings blessing. Especially for us who have to believe and trust without seeing. Jesus says, listen, if you'll trust me, even though you can't see me, if you'll believe, if you'll trust, I'll bless your life. I'll do something awesome in your life. You'll experience my best if you'll trust me and believe. I'll bring you a blessing. And so tonight I want to challenge you, just like Jesus said, that even though you can't see him, to believe. Because Jesus told us if we do, he'll bless our lives. In this series, as I told you, I'm going to continue to challenge you to move from being a fan to being a follower. And the first part of that tonight we see in Thomas is that to be a follower, you have to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. See, we can be a fan of Jesus' teachings and what he did and what he accomplished like all day long, but the crux of being a follower of Jesus, like, it begins with believing that Jesus died and rose again. You know, the Bible says that every one of us have sinned. We've fallen short of God's standard to have a relationship with him, to go to heaven when we die. Because the Bible says God's standard is moral perfection. And a lot of us are thinking, well, man, I'll just try harder. Like, I'll do better. Like, I'll come to Raider Church like every week. Like, I'll pray and I'll read my Bible. Like, I'll be a better person to try to meet God's standard. So hopefully he'll let me into heaven one day. You know, the Bible actually says salvation's not a reward for the good things that we've done. Like, in other words, good people don't go to heaven. Forgiven people do. And the Bible says you're forgiven of your sin when you commit your life to Jesus, when you trust in his payment of your fine through his death on the cross. And here's the great news. As the Bible says, when you trust in Jesus' payment of your fine for all of the sin in your life, past, present, and future, it's completely paid for. And here's how we know that's true. It's through the resurrection. You see, how do you know when a prisoner has paid his fine in full? He's been released from jail, right? He gets out of jail, he gets out of prison, the fine's been paid. He served his time, and he's released. That's how a prisoner knows their fine's been paid. They've served their time. That's when they've been released. Well, in the resurrection, we see Jesus being released. He's freed from the penalty of sin that he took upon himself. He didn't earn it. He didn't deserve it. But the Bible says he took the penalty for our sin upon himself. And he proved that it was paid for by conquering death, by conquering the grave, by conquering your sin and my sin, and by rising from the dead. And if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you've got to believe that he rose from the dead. And I know that seems like a lot to ask. Like it seems impossible. Like how could anybody really do that? Well, Thomas saw and believed. And his response was, Jesus, you're my God. You're God. You rose from the dead. You conquered sin. You conquered the grave. You are God, because only God could do something supernatural like that. I want to challenge you tonight, if you've never committed your life to Jesus, to make that decision, to commit your life to Christ. And after the service, drop by the Next Step Center. It's in our lobby. We've got a team there that wants to pray with you and celebrate that decision with you. I want to challenge you, if you've never made that decision, to commit your life to Jesus. Or maybe you're here and you've made that decision, but you've kind of been more like a fan of Jesus. You hadn't really taken that step to become a follower, to really grow in your relationship with Jesus. I want to challenge you tonight that even when the storm hits, even when things get tough, even when our messages here get tougher, to keep following Jesus, because you've become a follower now. You're not just a fan. Or maybe here tonight and you've got something you're struggling with. You've got a doubt, you've got a fear, you've got some sort of anxiety that you're battling, that you're struggling with. I want to pray for you tonight, that you wouldn't hear the condemnation or the judgment maybe that you feel like you hear from God for your struggle, for your doubt. Instead, you would see Jesus' nail-scarred hand reaching out to you and saying, come on, come follow me. Believe, trust, and I'll bless your life. We're going to sing here in just a second, and I want to invite you to do something. I just want to invite you to stand. Just right where you're at, just stand, close your eyes. We're going to sing here in just a second. Mark and the team are going to lead us. So just right where you're at, if you'll stand up. As you stand, I just want to invite you to pray with me. Close your eyes. And as you do, if you're here tonight, and there's something that you're struggling with, there's some doubt that you have, there's some fear, anxiety that you have tonight, I just want to ask that you would raise your hand and just kind of keep it up. Just as a confession saying, yeah, that's me. I doubt, like I'm doubting that Jesus can handle what I'm going through right now. I'm fearful of something in my life. I'm anxious about something in my life. I'm struggling with something right now. If that's you, I just want you to lift your hand up and keep it up. I want to pray for you. And even as we sing, I want you to keep that hand up in the air. And here's what I want you to picture tonight as we sing and your hands up in the air. It's just you lifting up your doubt. It's you lifting up your fear, your anxiety, your struggle. It's just you lifting it up to Jesus. And I want you to picture Jesus reaching down with his nail-scarred hand and saying, hey, I got this. I'm going to help you. I love you. Jesus, in this moment right now as we sing, I pray that many would put their faith in Jesus for the first time tonight. That Jesus, tonight, as we begin to sing, that people would just lift up their doubts, lift up their fear, lift up their struggle to you. And just like you did with Thomas, believe that you're going to meet them right where they're at. And you're going to take that. You're going to offer them your nailed, scarred hands, just like you offered them to Thomas. And you're going to take it. You're going to help them. And Jesus, in this moment, I pray that they would feel and hear you saying to them, I love you. I conquered the grave. I can take care of this. In Jesus' name.
Thanks for checking out one of our messages today. For more information about our church or to watch other messages, you can go to our website at experiencelife.now.com. Let us know if we can serve you in any way, and we hope to see you real soon.